Kethvaran remembered the exact moment his life ended. Not his body that still breathed, still pumped hot blood through ancient veins, still carried the fire of his ancestors in his chest, but everything else that made him who he was? That died on the day the elders spoke his name for the last time. The Cindermaw brood gathered in the great cavern. Thousands of dragons packed into a space carved from the heart of a dead moon. Their scales caught the light of the central fire pit, creating a sea of red and gold and black. Keth stood alone in the center, his wings pressed tight against his body, his head held high even as fear twisted in his stomach. The elder who spoke was named Verthinex, and he was older than most stars. His scales had turned white with age, cracked like dried earth, but his eyes still burned with the certainty that defined their kind. Dragons did not doubt. Dragons did not wonder. Dragons knew. Kethvaran of the Seventh Clutch, Verthinex said, his voice filling the cavern like thunder. You have committed the crime of questioning. You have asked why we hoard, when the answer is that we hoard because we are dragons. You have asked why we burn, when the answer is that we burn because fire lives within us. You have asked why we speak of humans with hatred, when none have seen them in 3,000 years. Keth wanted to defend himself. He wanted to explain that questions were not crimes, that understanding the reasons behind traditions could only make those traditions stronger. But he knew it would change nothing. The elders had already decided. You are declared Vethkaros, Verthinex continued. Missing. Your name will be struck from the brood songs. Your hunting grounds will be given to others. Your clutchmates will forget you existed. You are no longer of the Cindermaw. You are no longer of any brood. You are nothing. The gathered dragons turned their backs to him, thousands of them moving as one. Keth heard their wings rustle, heard their claws scrape against stone, heard the absolute silence that followed as they waited for him to leave Dot, so he left. That was 200 years ago. Keth had wandered ever since, drifting from system to system, surviving on whatever he could hunt or steal. The galaxy was dying around him, consumed by the expansion wars that had burned across known space for centuries. The great civilizations were falling one by one. The Valinari, with their crystal spires and their mastery of light itself, had been shattered by the Kron war machines. The Kron, in turn, had been consumed by the Machine Collective, which had then turned on itself in a cascade of corrupted code and competing directives. Everywhere Keth looked, he found ruins. He walked through cities where no living thing remained. He flew over battlefields where the bones of a dozen species lay mixed together, friend and enemy alike reduced to the same white dust. He found space stations drifting in the void, their power long dead, their corridors filled with the frozen remains of those who had not escaped in time. And through it all, he asked questions that no one could answer. Why did they fight? What were they fighting for? Did any of them, in the end, find what they were looking for? Or did they die still searching, still hungry for something they could not name? Keth grew thin. His scales, once bright copper, faded to a dull brown. The fire in his chest, which should have burned hot enough to melt steel, became a weak flicker that barely kept him warm during the long cold jumps between stars. He stopped hunting with purpose and started simply surviving, eating whatever crossed his path, sleeping wherever he could find shelter. He was dying, slowly but certainly, not from any wound or disease, but from something deeper. A dragon without a brood was a dragon without purpose, and a dragon without purpose was already dead. His body simply had not realized it yet. Then he found Earth. The planet appeared on his stolen navigation system as a red marker, indicating a dead world. The record said humans had lived there once, before the expansion wars reached their small corner of the galaxy. They had been one of the first species to fall, their primitive defenses no match for the forces that swept through their system. The evacuation ships had carried most of them away to scattered colonies, and those colonies had fallen too, one by one, until the species was listed as functionally extinct. Keth almost passed it by. He had seen enough dead worlds to last several lifetimes. But something made him slow, made him look closer at the sensor readings that flickered across his screen. There was heat. Not much, just a small signature in the northern hemisphere, barely visible against the background radiation. But it was there, something alive, on a world that should have been empty for centuries. Curiosity, the same curse that had gotten him exiled, now pulled him toward the blue-green sphere hanging in the darkness. He knew he should ignore it, should conserve his failing strength for the journey to wherever he was going next. But he had nowhere to go. He had no purpose, no goal, no reason to keep flying, except the simple animal fear of stopping dead. So he descended. Earth's atmosphere was thin but breathable, damaged by whatever weapons had been used during its fall, but slowly healing. Keth felt it rush past his scales as he dove through the clouds, felt the strange sensation of real air after so long in the recycled staleness of spacecraft. Below him, the planet spread out in patches of brown and green, dead zones alternating with areas where life had begun to return. He followed the heat, signature to a valley surrounded by low mountains. And there, nestled among trees that had no business growing on a dead world, he found something he did not expect. A building, small, made of stone and wood and glass, surrounded by gardens where vegetables grew in neat rows, where flowers bloomed in colors Keth had not seen in decades. He landed too hard, his weakened wings unable to slow him properly. The impact sent him crashing through something, a ceiling. He realized dimly, made of glass, and then he was inside, sprawled across a floor covered in debris and broken furniture. Pain flared in his left wing, sharp and immediate. He had torn something, damaged the delicate membrane that allowed him to fly. Blood his own, copper bright pooled beneath him. Keth tried to rise and failed. His strength was gone, spent in the descent. He lay there, breathing hard, waiting for the end that had been chasing him for 2 centuries to finally catch up. Then he heard footsteps, small, light, approaching without fear, and a voice, old, female, completely calm, said, "You're hurt." Keth turned his great head, his vision blurring at the edges, and saw a human standing over him. She was tiny, barely reaching his shoulder, even as he lay broken on the ground. Her hair was white, her skin wrinkled with age, her body bent slightly forward as if carrying an invisible weight. She wore strange glass circles over her eyes, and she held a book in one hand, as if she had been reading when he crashed through her ceiling. She should have been running. She should have been screaming. She should have been dead from fear. Alone dragons had that effect on prey species. A psychic pressure that triggered panic in lesser minds. Instead, she was pointing at his wing. "That needs setting," she said. "I don't have anything strong enough for a proper splint, but I have books on field medicine. We'll figure something out." Keth stared at her, and for the first time in 200 years, he had no idea what to do next. Margaret Chun had been waiting for something interesting to happen for 62 years. She had not expected it to come crashing through her skylight in the form of a bleeding dragon. But she was not about to complain about the delivery method. She was 93 years old. She had been born on Earth, raised on Earth, and had made the decision to die on Earth when everyone else was leaving. The evacuation ships had come in waves, each one carrying thousands of people to distant colonies that promised safety and new beginnings. Margaret had been offered a seat on 7 different ships. She had refused every time. Someone needed to stay with the books. The library had been built 300 years before Margaret was born, back when humans still thought they were alone in the universe. It had survived wars and disasters and the slow decay of the civilization that created it. When the aliens came, when the sky filled with ships and the news filled with warnings, Margaret had watched the other librarians pack their personal belongings and board the evacuation transports. She had watched the last of them look back at the building with tears in their eyes, knowing they would never see it again. Then she had walked back inside, made herself a cup of tea, and started reading. That was 62 years ago, in that time. Margaret had read every book in the library at least twice. She had repaired the shelves when they buckled. She had replaced the windows when storms shattered them. She had maintained the solar collectors on the roof, the water filtration system in the basement, and the small garden that provided most of her food. She had grown old in the company of words, and she had never once regretted her choice. The dragon was the first visitor she had received in all that time. She studied it now as it lay on her floor, its massive body taking up most of the reading room, its blood staining the wood she had polished just last week. It was beautiful in a terrible way, like a storm or a wildfire. Its scales were dull and cracked, its wings torn, its eyes clouded with exhaustion. But beneath the damage, she could see what it must have been once, a creature of power and grace. Built for fire and flight, it was also clearly confused by her lack of fear. "I'll put the kettle on," Margaret said, stepping carefully over a fallen bookshelf. "You look like you could use some tea." The dragon made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a groan of pain. "You do not run," it said, its voice deep and rough, shaped by a translator device that hung around its neck like a pendant. "You do not scream. You offer me tea?" "Running seems pointless at my age," Margaret said, "and screaming has never solved anything. As for the tea, well, it's what we do. Humans, I mean. When we don't know what else to do, we make tea." She paused at the doorway to the kitchen. "Do dragons drink tea?" "I do not know what tea is." "Then you're in for a treat." She left the dragon lying there and went to fill the kettle. Her hands were steady as she worked, but her mind was racing. A dragon, an actual dragon, here on Earth, in her library. She had read about them. Of course, the Cindermaw brood was mentioned in several of the xenobiology texts that had been published in the years before the evacuation. Ancient species, fire breathers, territorial and proud, and utterly convinced of their own superiority. This one did not look superior. This one looked lost. When the tea was ready, Margaret carried 2 cups back to the reading room. She had to step over the dragon's tail to reach her favorite chair, which had somehow survived the crash intact. She sat down, took a sip from her cup, and waited. The dragon watched her with eyes like molten gold. "Why do you stay?" it asked finally. "This world is dead. Your species is gone. Why do you remain in this place, alone?" Margaret considered the question. It was one she had asked herself many times over the years, usually in the dark hours before dawn when loneliness pressed against her like a physical weight. "Because of the books," she said, gesturing at the shelves that lined every wall, that filled every room, that rose from floor to ceiling in towers of paper and leather and ink. Someone needed to take care of them. Someone needed to remember. Remember what? That we existed. That we mattered. That we were more than just, she searched for the right word, more than just victims. More than just a species that lost its war and died. The dragon was quiet for a long moment. Then it said, "I am called Kethvaran, though that name means nothing now. I am Vethkaro's missing, erased from my brood. Why? Because I ask questions." Bitterness crept into its voice. "Dragons do not ask questions. We know. We are certain. I was not certain, so I was cast out." Margaret nodded slowly. She understood exile in her own way. She had chosen hers willingly, but the result was the same years of solitude. of talking only to herself and the books, of watching the world heal without anyone to share it with. "Well, Keth Varan," she said, "you're welcome to stay here while you heal. I don't have much, but I have shelter and food, and—" She smiled slightly. "More books than you could read in 1,000 lifetimes. Why would you help me? I am a predator. Your kind is prey to mine. Is that what your elders taught you?" "It is what we know." Margaret set down her cup and leaned forward, her old eyes sharp behind their glass circles. "Let me tell you what I know," she said. "I know that you crashed through my roof, which means you have nowhere else to go. I know that you're hurt and hungry and alone, which means you need help. And I know—" She paused, weighing her words carefully. "I know that anyone who was cast out for asking questions is probably worth knowing." Keth stared at her. In his entire life, no one had ever spoken to him like this. Not his clutchmates, not his elders, not the countless creatures he had encountered in his wanderings. They had all either feared him or dismissed him or tried to kill him. This tiny, fragile human was offering him kindness. "I do not understand you," he admitted. "That's all right," Margaret said. "We have time. Now drink your tea before it gets cold." Keth looked at the cup she had placed near his head, comically small against his massive snout. He had no idea how he was supposed to drink from it, but he lowered his head anyway, extended his tongue, and tasted the strange brown liquid dot. It was warm. Slightly bitter, but in a pleasant way. Nothing like the blood and meat that had sustained him for centuries. "This is acceptable," he said. Margaret laughed a real laugh, bright and unexpected, the first she had let herself feel in years. "High praise from a dragon. Now, let's see about that wing of yours. I'm going to need to find my medical books." She rose from her chair and began searching the shelves, pulling down volumes and stacking them on a table. Keth watched her move. This small creature, who should have been nothing more than food, who instead was treating him like a patient and a guest. He did not understand her. But for the first time in 200 years, he wanted to. And somewhere deep in his chest, beneath the dying embers of his fire, something new began to flicker. It was small and fragile, easily extinguished. But it was their hope, though Keth did not yet know its name. The weeks passed slowly, measured by the healing of Keth's wing and the growing number of books stacked beside his resting place. Margaret had set his bones as best she could, using metal rods scavenged from the basement and cloth strips torn from old curtains. She had cleaned his wounds with solutions mixed according to instructions in her medical texts. She had fed him meat from her store's dried fish, mostly, preserved from the streams that ran through the valley, and vegetables from her garden when he would accept them. But more importantly, she had begun to teach him to read. It started as a way to pass the time. Keth was too injured to move much, and Margaret could only spend so many hours working in the garden or maintaining the library systems. So she sat beside him with a book in her lap and began to explain how human writing worked. "Each symbol represents a sound," she said, tracing the letters with her finger. "When you put them together, they form words. And the words form sentences, and the sentences form ideas." Keth studied the marks on the page with the intensity of a predator tracking prey. "This seems needlessly complicated. Dragons communicate through memory. We share thoughts directly, image to image, feeling to feeling." "That sounds efficient," Margaret admitted. "But you can only share what you already know. Writing lets us preserve things that would otherwise be lost. Thoughts from people who died centuries ago. Stories from places that no longer exist." She smiled. "Ideas that haven't been born yet, waiting for someone to discover them." It took Keth 3 weeks to master the basics. His eyes, designed for hunting in darkness, could pick out the smallest text from across the room. His memory, honed by centuries of territorial calculations, could hold entire pages after a single reading. What he lacked was context, the cultural knowledge that gave the words their meaning. Margaret provided that. Every book became a lesson, every story a window into human nature. She read to him when his eyes grew tired, her voice filling the library with tales of heroes and monsters, of love and loss, of ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances. The first book Keth read on his own was a collection of Greek myths. "This Odysseus," he said, puzzling over the pages. "He lies constantly. He tricks his enemies. He hides his true nature. Among dragons, this would be shameful. Deception as the tool of the weak. Among humans, it's the tool of the clever," Margaret said. "We were never the strongest species, or the fastest, or the most dangerous. We survived by thinking our way out of problems. Odysseus is a hero because he uses his mind when his muscles aren't enough. But he loses everything. His ship, his crew. He spends 10 years trying to return home. And he never gives up," Margaret said. "That's the point. No matter how many times he's knocked down, he gets back up. He keeps fighting. He keeps trying." Keth was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "Dragons do not have stories like this. What do you have? Records, histories, lists of territories conquered and battles won." He paused, searching for words. "We remember what happened, but we do not imagine what might happen. We do not create people who never existed and give them problems to solve. Why not?" The question caught him off guard. "I do not know. It simply never occurred to us. We have always known what we are. Why would we pretend to be something else?" Margaret stood and walked to her shelves, her fingers trailing along the spines of the books. "Humans pretend to be something else because we're not always happy with what we are. We imagine better versions of ourselves, braver and kinder and wiser. And sometimes," she pulled down a worn paperback, its cover faded with age. "Sometimes, by imagining them, we become them." She handed him the book. It was called The Lord of the Rings, and it was thicker than anything he had read so far. "Try this one," she said. "It's about small people doing big things. I think you might like it." Keth liked it. He liked it so much that he read it 3 times in a row, barely sleeping, his eyes glued to the pages as hobbits and wizards and warriors marched across Middle-earth. He wept when Gandalf fell in Moria, actually wept. Tears hissing against his scales like water on hot stone, and roared with triumph when the eagles came at the Black Gate. "This is not real," he said when he finally finished, his voice rough with emotion. "None of this happened. This Tolkien made it all from nothing. That's right. But I feel as if I know them. Frodo and Sam and Aragorn. I feel as if they are my friends, even though they never existed." Margaret sat beside him, her hand resting on his massive foreleg. "That's the power of stories. They create connections that cross time and space and species. They let us understand each other in ways that facts and records never could." Keth looked at the book in his claws, then at the thousands of other books lining the walls. He had always known that dragons hoarded treasure gold and gems and precious artifacts, gathered and guarded with fierce jealousy. It was in their blood, an instinct older than memory, but he had never understood why. Now, surrounded by human stories, he began to wonder if dragons had been hoarding the wrong things all along. "Margaret," he said slowly, "what is the most valuable thing in this library?" She considered the question. "That depends on what you mean by valuable. Some of these books are hundreds of years old, which makes them rare. Some contain knowledge that exists nowhere else in the galaxy. Some," she paused, her eyes distant, "some were given to me by people I loved, who are gone now. Those are the most valuable to me. But they are just paper and ink. They could be destroyed by fire, by water, by time. Yes. Then how can they be valuable?" Margaret smiled, and there was something ancient in her expression, something that belied her fragile human form. Because value isn't about permanence, Kath. It's about meaning. These books are valuable because of what they represent, the thoughts and dreams and fears of everyone who wrote them and everyone who read them. They're valuable because they connect us to something larger than ourselves. She gestured at the shelves around them. Every one of these books is a conversation with the dead. Every time you read one, you're hearing voices that fell silent centuries ago. You're learning from people who will never exist again. Her voice softened. That's what we leave behind, we humans. Not territory, not gold, just words. Just the hope that someone someday will read them and understand. Kath was quiet for a long time after that. He looked at the book in his claws, at the shelves climbing toward the ceiling, at the small old woman who had taken in a broken dragon and treated him like a friend, and he realized that he had finally found what he had been searching for since his exile. Began not a new brood, not a territory to claim, not revenge against the elders who had cast him out. He had found meaning. It was a small thing, fragile as paper, easily destroyed. But it burned in his chest like a new kind of fire, warmer and brighter than anything he had known before. "Teach me more," he said. "Please, I want to understand." Margaret's smile widened, crinkling the lines around her eyes. "We have plenty of time," she said, "and I have so many books to show you." They came on a morning like any other, dropping through the clouds like falling stars. Kath sensed them before he saw them, a pressure in his mind, familiar and terrible, the psychic weight of his own kind. He was in the garden with Margaret, helping her harvest vegetables, his claws surprisingly gentle as they picked beans from their vines. He stopped mid-motion, his head snapping upward, his eyes scanning the sky. "What is it?" Margaret asked. "Dragons," Kath said. "3 of them, elders." Margaret set down her basket. Her face was calm, but Kath could hear her heartbeat quicken, could smell the sharp scent of fear that humans could never quite hide. "They found you, yes." He straightened, his wings spreading instinctively. They had healed well over the past months, the membrane growing back strong and flexible. He could fly again if he needed to. But flight would mean leaving the library behind, leaving Margaret behind, and he would not do that. They are coming to finish what they started. A missing dragon is a threat to their certainty. I must be erased. Can you fight them? Kath turned to look at her, this tiny creature who had saved his life, who had shown him a world beyond territory and fire and the endless hunger for dominance. "I can try," he said. "But elders are older than stars. Their fire burns hotter than plasma. Their scales are harder than any metal. Against 3 of them." He shook his head. "I have no chance. Then run." No. The word came out harder than he intended. He softened his voice. "I will not run. Not from this. Not anymore." Margaret studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded once, sharply, and walked back toward the library. "Then we fight together. Come on. We don't have much time." They landed in the valley an hour later. 3 shapes of black and white and deep red, their scales scarred from centuries of battle, their eyes burning with the cold certainty of their kind. Kath stood before the library doors, his body positioned to shield the entrance, his wings spread in the ancient posture of challenge. The largest of them stepped forward. His scales were white with age, cracked and weathered like old stone. Kath recognized him, Verthinax, the same elder who had pronounced his exile 200 years ago. "Kath Varan," Verthinax said, his voice like grinding boulders. "You have made yourself easy to find. Your biosignature blazes across 12 systems like a beacon. Did you wish to be discovered?" "I no longer hide from what I am," Kath replied. "And what is that? A traitor? A contaminant?" The elder's eyes swept across the library, taking in the ancient building, the gardens, the books visible through the cracked windows. You have been living among human ruins, feeding on their leavings. You have fallen even further than we imagined. I have risen, Keth said. I have found something that our entire species lacks. Something you will never understand. And what is that? Keth drew a breath, filling his lungs with the cool morning air. Meaning. Purpose beyond territory and dominance and fire. The humans, these creatures you call prey, they discovered something we never did. They learned how to make death meaningful, how to create beauty from suffering, how to leave behind something greater than themselves. The three elders exchanged glances. Then, to Keth's surprise, Verthinax laughed a terrible sound, like rocks splitting in a landslide. Sentiment, the elder said. Prey thinking. You have been corrupted by lesser minds. This is why we declared you missing. This is why you must be unmade. Fire gathered in Verthinax's throat, white-hot and blindingly bright. The other two elders spread out, surrounding Keth, their own flames building in their chests. Keth did not move. He did not flinch. He simply said, "You are wrong, and I will prove it." He attacked, not with fire. His flames were still weak compared to the elders, a candle against a furnace. Instead, he used his body, throwing himself at Verthinax with all the speed he could muster. The elder was surprised. Dragons did not fight like this, did not abandon the advantage of range for close combat. By the time Verthinax reacted, Keth had already slammed into his side, sending both of them crashing through the garden and into the trees beyond. The other two elders roared and gave chase, their flames scorching the air where Keth had been moments before. But Keth was not where they expected him to be. He had studied human warfare during his months in the library Sun Tzu and Clausewitz, accounts of guerrilla fighters and resistance movements. He knew that the weak could defeat the strong by refusing to fight on the strong's terms. He used the terrain. He ducked behind rocks and emerged from unexpected angles. He led the elders into the library's narrow corridors, where their size became a disadvantage and their flames risked destroying everything around them. He sacrificed ground to gain time, traded wounds for opportunities, fought not to win but to survive. But it was not enough. There were three of them, and they were ancient beyond measure. And Keth was only one young dragon who had learned to read. Verthinax finally cornered him in the main reading room. Keth's scales were blackened from near misses, his left wing torn again, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The elder loomed over him, white fire building in his throat, ready to deliver the killing blow. "You fought well," Verthinax admitted. "Better than expected. But prey thinking cannot save you. Nothing can save you." The elder opened his jaws, and Margaret stepped out from behind a bookshelf. Holding a mirror dot, it was a simple thing. Glass and silver, used for examining damaged manuscripts. Margaret had found it in the basement weeks ago. Had polished it until it shone like water dot. She positioned it with hands that did not shake. Verthinax's. Flames erupt and reflected straight back into his eyes. The elder screamed, a sound that shook the building to its foundations. He reared back, blinded, his fire sputtering as pain overwhelmed his concentration. And in that moment of weakness, Keth struck. He did not hesitate. He did not show mercy. He remembered everything he had read about human warriors who faced impossible odds and refused to surrender. He drove his claws into Verthinax's throat and tore. The elder fell. The two remaining dragons stared in disbelief. An elder killed. By a missing dragon and a human prey creature working together. It was impossible. It was unthinkable, Dot. It was exactly what Keth had been trying to tell them all along. "Go," Keth said, his voice steady despite his wounds. "Tell the others what happened here. Tell them that the prey you dismissed created something powerful enough to kill an elder. Tell them that questions are not weaknesses, and that certainty is not strength. The dragons fled. They did not look back. Keth collapsed beside Margaret, his body broken, his fire guttering. She knelt beside him, pressing her small human hand against his scorched scales. "You should have run," he whispered. "This is my home," she said. Her voice was fierce despite her age, despite her frailty. "These are my books. And you," her voice cracked, "you're my friend." "I don't run from friends." Keth wanted to respond. He wanted to thank her for everything she had given him, the knowledge, the stories, the sense of purpose he had searched for his entire life. But exhaustion claimed him before he could speak, and he slipped into darkness. His last thought before unconsciousness took him was that humans were the strangest creatures he had ever known, and the most magnificent. Keth healed slowly this time. His wounds were deeper, his body older, his reserves of strength nearly exhausted by the battle. Margaret tended to him as she had before, cleaning his burns and setting his bones, sitting beside him through the long nights when fever made him delirious. But Margaret was not healing. Keth noticed it in small ways at first, the way she moved more slowly, the way her hands trembled when she held her books, the way she slept longer and longer each day. He did not want to believe what he was seeing. He had read enough about humans to understand their biology, to know that their bodies wore out in ways that dragons never experienced. But knowing and accepting were different things. "You are dying," he said one evening, as the sunset painted the library windows in shades of gold and red. Margaret did not deny it. She simply looked up from the book in her lap and smiled. "I've been dying since I was born, Keth. That's how it works for us. The difference is that now I can feel it happening. Is there nothing that can be done? Medicine? Technology? I could search the galaxy for... No." She reached out and touched his claw, her fingers impossibly small against his scaled digit. "This is natural. This is right. I've lived longer than most humans ever have, and I've lived well." Her smile widened, especially these last few months. Having someone to talk to again, sharing my books with someone who appreciates them. It's been the best time of my life. Keth did not know what to say. He had faced elders in combat, had killed one with his own claws, but this watching someone he loved fade away was beyond anything he knew how to handle. "I have something for you," Margaret said. She gestured toward a shelf near her chair, and Keth saw a stack of papers that had not been there before. "I've been writing, putting down everything I know about the library, about the books, about what they mean and why they matter. Instructions for maintenance, notes on my favorite volumes, stories about my life before." She paused. "I want you to have it. All of it. I do not understand. The library, Keth, I'm leaving it to you. Someone needs to take care of it when I'm gone. Someone needs to keep reading the books, keep telling the stories." Her eyes, still sharp behind their glass circles, met his. "I can't think of anyone better than a dragon who learned to love them." Keth was silent for a long moment. The responsibility she was offering was immense, not just the physical burden of maintaining the building and its contents, but the spiritual weight of becoming the keeper of human memory. A dragon guarding the treasure of an extinct species. It should have been absurd. Instead, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. "I accept," he said. "I will guard this place. I will read these books. I will remember what humanity was, and I will share that memory with anyone who comes seeking it." Margaret nodded. She looked tired, but also at peace. "Good, that's good." She leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes. "Read to me, Keth, one more story before I sleep." He chose her favorite, a collection of poetry by a human named Mary Oliver. He read about wild geese and the soft animal of the body, about saving the only life you could save. His voice filled the library as the last light faded from the windows. As the stars emerged one by one in the darkening sky, Margaret died 3 months later. In her sleep, with Keth curled around her chair like a living wall. He buried her in the garden, beneath the apple tree that she had planted 60 years before. He marked the grave with a stone carved from the mountains, and on it he wrote the words that seemed most fitting. Margaret Chun, librarian, friend. She showed a dragon how to hope. Then he went back to work. Word spread slowly through the refugee networks, carried by traders and travelers and the few remaining ships that crossed between star systems. A dragon on Earth, a library full of human books, a place where anyone could come to learn, to read, to discover something new. They came hesitantly at first. A Velinari scholar, her crystal skin dulled by grief, seeking distraction from the loss of her world. A group of Kron engineers, their war machines rusting and useless, looking for something to build that would not destroy. A ship full of mixed-species refugees, children who had never known peace, who had never read a story that did not end in fire. Keth welcomed them all. He taught them to read as Margaret had taught him. He shared the books with them, the myths and novels and poetry, the histories and philosophies, the stories of ordinary humans doing extraordinary things. And something began to change. The Velinari scholar returned to her scattered people and told them of a place where beauty still existed. The Kron engineers built copies of the solar collectors, then the water filtration system, then a network of shelters for the refugees who kept arriving. The children learned to read and grew into adults who remembered the lessons of the books. That courage mattered more than strength. That hope was a choice, that even the smallest person could change the course of history. In the Cindermall brood, young dragons began to whisper. They spoke of Kethvaran, the missing dragon who had killed an elder and claimed a planet for his own. But more importantly, they spoke of what he had found there. These strange human artifacts called books, which contained something that dragons had never possessed. Some of them left, quietly, secretly, following the same path that Keth had once walked. They found their way to Earth, to the library in the valley, to the dragon who had become something more than his species had ever imagined. Keth taught them too, not just to read, but to question, not just to learn, but to wonder. He gave them the gift that Margaret had given him, the understanding that meaning was not inherited but created. That purpose was not a birthright, but a choice. And slowly, one dragon at a time, the Cindermall brood began to change. The elders resisted, of course. They declared all who left to be missing, struck their names from the brood songs, threatened death to any who returned. But the young dragons kept coming, and the stories kept spreading. And eventually, even the elders had to admit that something unprecedented was happening. A generation later, the first dragon arrived at the library carrying a book of her own. She had written it, a Sci-Fi story about a young dragon who questioned everything and found answers in unexpected places. It was clumsy and imperfect, shaped by a mind that was still learning how imagination worked. But it was a story, a real story, the first one ever written by a dragon in all the history of their ancient species. Keth added it to the shelves with the same reverence he had once seen Margaret show for her most treasured volumes. "Tell me," he said to the young dragon, "what made you want to write this?" She thought for a moment. Then she said, "I wanted to create something that would last longer than I would, something that others could find after I was gone." She looked at the shelves around her, at the thousands of human stories that filled them. Like they did. The humans. I wanted to be like them. Keth remembered Margaret's words from so long ago about mortality being a crucible, about death giving life its meaning. "You have learned the most important lesson," he said. The humans were a small species, short-lived, fragile. They lost their war. They lost their world. He gestured at the library. at the new arrivals reading in the corners, at the gardens thriving beyond the windows, at the future that Margaret had made possible with nothing but kindness and books. But they left this behind. And because they did, they will never truly be gone. The young dragon nodded slowly. What was she like? The human who started all this? Keth looked toward the garden, toward the apple tree and the stone beneath it. He thought of Margaret, her stubbornness, her kindness, her absolute refusal to abandon what she loved. She was magnificent, he said. The most magnificent creature I have ever known. Then he smiled, settled himself among the shelves, and began to read. Outside, the sun rose over a world that was no longer dead. In the garden, flowers bloomed in colors that had no names. In the library, stories waited to be discovered. And in the brood songs of the Cindermore, a new name had begun to appear. Not Kethvaran, the exiled. Not Vethkeros, the missing. Keth single quotes VAROS. Found.